Hello, everyone. I'm Stan Goldstein with Kates-Boylston Publications. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Rate Your Business's Performance and Determine Areas of Improvement. It's hosted by Vince Roberge of Johnson Consulting. There's a questions tab on the right side of your screen, and you can answer any questions you might have, and he will answer them at the end of the webinar. Vince, please take it away.
Thank you, Stan, and good morning to some of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to most of you in the Central and Eastern time zones. It's a real pleasure to be with you today to talk about this subject, rating business performance and determining areas of improvement. This is very central to the work that I and many of my colleagues do at Johnson Consulting Group, and I look forward to sharing some value with all of you here today. If you know something about Johnson Consulting Group, you have probably seen or heard us talk about the four fundamentals of funeral home and cemetery operations. When we look at business performance, whether it's for a funeral home or a cemetery, we look at performance through four different lenses. And those are the lenses that are on the screen. We think of these four areas as the four legs of a stool in many ways. Just like four legs of a stool need to be strong, sturdy, and of equal length, so too do the areas of a funeral home or cemetery business. We know that we need to be consistently exceeding the expectations of not just our client families, but also their guests, and really everyone the firm comes into contact with. That goes to the church administrators and even the FedEx delivery person. I'll also talk about assessing business performance in the workplace. What does it mean to create an optimal workplace environment for your staff and employees? What are some key ingredients for improving the culture in the overall environment so that your employees can deliver upon the service promises to your families? We'll also talk about business performance in the marketplace and then also financial performance. I know when many of us think of rating business performance, one of the first things that comes to mind is financial performance. But it's very important that we start with some of these other areas because they contribute significantly to the overall health and performance of funeral home and cemetery enterprises. So with that, let's get started with the first of the four legs of the stool, so to speak, which is customer service, customer satisfaction, and customer experience. So when we think about assessing customer experience at a funeral home, what's the best way to do that? Well, we believe that we need to be asking our client families. If we want feedback, we have to ask for it. And what we believe strongly is that we need to have meaningful feedback. And that means to have survey results that are in a format where we can actually make management decisions. We can drill down to the important pieces of information that need to be found, and then we can drive towards improvement based on the type of responses and data that we have. What's on the screen here is a dashboard of our performance tracker platform, which is our survey and sales analysis platform. And I want to talk just briefly about three key metrics when it comes to rating business performance in the area of customer satisfaction. So many of you are familiar with the idea of a net promoter score. This is a score that spans different industries and spaces. We use it in the death care profession as well. And that's based all on the question of how likely are you to recommend this firm to a friend, colleague, or coworker. And that net promoter score is really sort of a window into the future. It's considered a leading metric, and I'll share the reasons why in just a minute. But we track that metric very carefully and closely because of its connection to the health or future health of our business. The second metric that's on the screen here is what we call overall performance score. This is an aggregate score of all the touch points, all those interaction points along the service cycle. I'm going to break down the service cycle for the funeral home in just a few minutes and talk a little bit about how you can implement some steps to really transform your customer experience. But it's good to know that there's a metric and a measurable way of assessing performance for each one of those touch points of the family's experience. And then the third metric of these three high-level key metrics for rating customer satisfaction is the total value index. Total value index is a blend of those first two, but we also incorporate a value question that's on our survey. So this becomes a very important metric along with that value question data when it comes to making pricing decisions and truly understanding if our client families are receiving value for the prices that they're paying for funeral goods and ceremonies. Just so that you're all aware, Net Promoter Score, as I mentioned, it's a score that you'd see in other service industries. In the death care profession, it's markedly higher. And feel free to search what some average scores are for Net Promoter, but we typically see Net Promoter scores in the mid 80s, which is really a striking score for Net Promoter. If you have a Net Promoter score that's in the 90s, you're in elite territory when it comes to a funeral home or cemetery enterprise. Now, I'm a funeral director myself, and I've always said to clients that I work with, and when I talk with other funeral directors, that we are in many ways at a distinct advantage when it comes to delivering exceptional customer satisfaction and memorable service experiences with our client families, because there are some unique aspects of customer experience in the death care profession. The first is that our client families are in many ways primed to remember their experience. This is an extraordinarily sensitive time in their life. The grief is acute. This is a very challenging moment in everyone's life, and we have the privilege of serving these families during this time. You think back to the losses in your own life. You tend to remember those moments and those experiences. And this is something that we can use not only to the benefit of our client families to help craft great service experiences, but also we can use this to the benefit of our organizations and our businesses. And I'll talk a little bit about how in just a minute. The second unique aspect that I truly believe funeral service has when it comes to customer experience is that our employees genuinely care. We are in a vocational type of space, a vocational type of business where people are called to do this work. And many employees are passionate about serving their families and serving the families in the community. So if our client families are going to remember their service experience and our employees genuinely care about doing good work, then what's the issue? Well, part of the issue is something we like to call service aptitude. Service aptitude is a person's ability to recognize and exceed a customer expectation regardless of the circumstance. And service aptitude is not innate. We're not born with it. It's not something that we come into this world with. Our prior work experiences, our prior life experiences shape our service aptitude. I'm guessing that all of you on the call today have people on your teams who have exceptional levels of service aptitude. They're the people that can turn a situation around if something goes wrong. They're the ones that are consistently delivering at a high level and wowing families. It's important that we as operators, managers, and owners of funeral homes train on service aptitude. And we need to set some expectations first, and that's what I'm going to talk about here momentarily. Before I do, though, I want to share with you some additional data that's come out of Performance Tracker from last year. Perhaps unsurprisingly, when you think about the reasons your families choose your funeral home, it's likely that there was some prior experience, right? We typically see this reason as being the top. Now, the data we're looking at is coming out of Performance Tracker from last year. This is an aggregate of tens of thousands of surveys that were sent to client families across North America. And what we ask is, what were the primary reasons you selected the funeral home? Well, clearly, a previous service was a prime reason for selecting the funeral home. But when we dig into this data in a little more detail, what we start to find is that there are other service-based reasons or experience-based reasons that families chose the funeral home. Online ratings and reviews, coming highly recommended, previously served, initial contact, reputation. All of these things are based on a prior experience that was provided by either you or a member of your team. So to say that customer experience is not the most important thing in terms of business performance, there's a lot of opportunity here. If you're not focused on customer experience, we need to be looking at the way that we deliver service to our client families through a new lens. I would say that well over 2/3 of client families across North America select a funeral home for a service-based reason. There are some duplicates that exist in this data because families can check multiple boxes. But the bottom line is that if we're not placing customer experience at the center of our business, our staff development, which I'll talk about, and our marketing plans, then we are missing a significant opportunity to grow our business. So let's talk for a moment about the nuts and bolts impact of world-class customer experience. I like to use this example, and I title it the impact of the marginal call, because we all understand what that one additional call at the end of the year can do to profitability. And if you don't, here's a brief example. These are the calls, for example, that come because of that extra referral, that world-class experience you provided to the family last month that ends up referring a coworker or a friend in the future. So let's say we have a 500 call firm. The average sale at this firm is $5,000. The easy math there is 2.5 million in revenue. If this firm is performing at a high level financially, which I'll talk about a little later in the webinar, then we could say that they have a 30% EBITDA, which equates to 750,000 in EBITDA. Now, assuming some characteristics of the marketplace and some other non-numeric factors, we would ascribe sort of a rudimentary multiple, just an easy multiple to work with of 6, giving us an enterprise value, in this case, of about $4.5 million. So this also equates to $1,500 per call in EBITDA. Now, because we're a high fixed cost business, those marginal calls that we serve tend to have larger proportions of the revenue that actually drop to EBITDA or profitability. So in this case, what we're assuming, which is in many ways very close to reality, is that instead of that 30% EBITDA, we're actually much closer to 70% EBITDA, because all those fixed expenses are covered by the first 500 calls. So call 501 boosts enterprise value by $21,000, given that 6 times multiple. And if we can serve 5 additional families, that can boost enterprise value by up to $100,000. So the impact of customer experience, experience-based reasons families choose a funeral home, referrals, and so forth, have material effect to the overall value of your funeral home business and the overall financial performance of the business as well. So with these things being known, what are the types of actions you can take at your firm to improve the customer experience, to really transform your business to a world-class customer experience company? One of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit you have is the recipe for serving families. I know there are a number of people on the call today that are serving families at an exceptionally high level. If I were to make a bet, I would say that most of you are. But what I'm curious to know is if you actually have documented service standards. There are a tremendous amount of behind the scenes operating procedures that are needed for a funeral home business. These are things like our cremation procedures, identification procedures, chain of custody, the way in which we file death certificates. A lot of procedures exist, right? But we tend to underemphasize the interactions, the experiential points of interaction that we have with our client families. And that's what's on the screen. We all know the journey that our families take through the funeral home. We know it well. You know, it starts with an initial call. We do a transfer of their loved one. We have some form of consultation or arrangement conference. Typically, there's a gathering or a ceremony, but you know the general journey your families take. One of the best practices is to capture the recipe that you currently have in the form of service standards. Service standards are the non-negotiables, as we like to put it. We do workshops that are based on this methodology where we build a playbook off of the experiential service standards that a firm has. We help firms in documenting their service standards. We also build above and beyond that. We involve the team in crafting practices that perhaps we can't do every single time, but these are the great ideas that we can do to really wow families. We can also identify the things that go wrong at each one of these stages. So from initial contact all the way through aftercare, there are steps along the way. Again, these are touch points. These are experiential situations we're having with client families. And not only have we documented the non-negotiables, but we've identified also what can go wrong, what can get in the way of us delivering upon these value promises to our families. This is all piece or part of a playbook that your firm can have to really transform your culture to become a world-class customer service company. Another piece of the playbook that I like to share with firms and all of you on the call is something as simple as a customer bill of rights. You know, in this example, this is just a list of words that a firm has agreed upon that we're never going to use with our client families. We're never going to use the word refrigeration. We're always going to use the word in our care. We're never going to use the word removal with a client family. We're always going to use the word bring into our care. So these simple practices can have a pretty profound effect on the type of culture you create with your employees. But if you think about that recipe that you have, you know, it might be in your mind, it might be in the mind of some of the veteran funeral directors and staff people that are on your team. But as you bring in new employees, you need to be able to train on these. You need to be able to keep this playbook, keep these service standards alive, leverage them, and be consistently upskilling and training on them. One of the other practices that we are big promoters of is to really implement what we call a CX huddle. I'll talk a little bit later about the value of an operational huddle in the morning, but this is a little different. A CX huddle is something that would be a weekly type of stand-up meeting. It's short in duration, and you're really staying connected to your playbook that you've created, the service standards for a first call, the service standards for a transfer of a loved one, the standards for an arrangement conference, and so forth. This is a way of really keeping things that are so important to your firm and the growth of your firm front and center to your team. It's also a really great opportunity to share customer experience stories, survey feedback. If you're surveying your families, you know that there's lots of great data in there for kudos and staff recognition. So the CX huddle can really leverage one of those two reasons that I have already shared with you about why customer experience is different in the death care profession, and that's our employees. You know, they come to work with a desire to take care of the families in our communities, and this is a way that we can really leverage that passion and drive that exists in the walls of our funeral home. So there you have it. We've talked a little bit about customer experience, assessing performance through asking our customers, asking for feedback, right? We're going to be looking at Net Promoter Score. We're going to be looking at other metrics like overall performance score and total value index. And we're going to be using those to make management decisions. We're also going to be able to implement a playbook, a set of service standards that allows us to increase service aptitude among our staff and continually strive at improving our client or client family experience. So next on the agenda here is the workplace. Now, when we think about assessing business performance, it's probably one of the last things we think about is measuring performance in a funeral home workplace. How do we do that? What is the purpose of that? Well, your employees are the ones who are delivering that world-class customer experience, right? We've already talked about why and how important that customer experience is for the future health of your business. And so the culture of your firm influences your CX, and it in turn impacts your enterprise value. So we do need to focus very closely on the workplace environment just as we would the financial performance, which I'll talk about momentarily. So what are some ways in which we can assess the health of a funeral home workplace? Just like we would ask our client families for feedback, we can also ask our employees. Johnson Consulting Group does administer employee engagement surveys where we're asking employees about things such as pay and benefits, compensation, and workplace culture. Workplace morale is a very difficult thing to really ascribe a number to, but there are some methods we use to really get a sense of where we're at in terms of improving workplace morale, or if we're in a downward trend. I'm going to share with you some ingredients for an optimum workplace environment here in just a minute. But what are some other health metrics for the workplace? Employee turnover can be a big one. You all know the statistics, I imagine, of how costly employee turnover can be, sometimes as high as 1.5 or 2 times the employee's salary. So what we want to do is create that optimum workplace environment, one that provides a career-long opportunity for our teams to grow and develop, and also to contribute to the health and sustainability of our firms. Average tenure of employee. I've worked with some firms that have disproportionately veteran staff, meaning the vast majority of their staff are nearing the retirement age. This is something to be very focused on and be aware of if you're planning for your succession of your funeral home business. There are some great practices with regards to developing mentor programs to ensure that the skills, the knowledge, the experience of those veteran funeral directors is being passed on in an effective way. And finally, an outside perspective. There is no better way to get an understanding of the health of your workplace than getting an outsider's perspective. It's extraordinarily difficult to really accurately see the environment that you're living and operating in. You need an outsider's view oftentimes. And that can be a very uncomfortable place to be for many operators, owners, and managers of funeral homes, is to invite someone in, like Johnson Consulting Group, to really take an approach at seeing the firm through 360 degrees, all 4 of these fundamentals. So I'd encourage you, I'd challenge you to be thinking about that as you think about the health of your funeral home workplace. In terms of the ingredients of a well-run and optimum workplace environment, I want to share 3. Clearly there are more, but these are the 3 that we consistently see as being low-hanging fruit in areas of opportunity. Setting clear expectations, effective communication, and accountability management. If you can continually work on these 3 areas, you're going to be doing some good work in developing a really optimum workplace environment. So many firms, especially over the last 2 years, have grown to almost a point of inflection where the structure of their workplace, the tools that they've used, they are outgrowing. You know, for a 200 call firm, for a 100 call firm, the types of workplace tools that you need to have an effective environment and a positive environment are very different than the tools and infrastructure you need for a 600 call or 1,000 call firm. And the fact of the matter is that many firms have seen tremendous growth over the last 2, 3, or 5 years. So it's oftentimes a question, a crossroads that we need to be asking ourselves. What are we not doing that we should be doing? Or what have we not been doing in the past that we may need to be thinking about implementing? So let's talk a little bit about clear expectations. What are the best ways of setting clear expectations for our staff and our employees? Well, it starts with having clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Again, there are a lot of firms that have grown to a point without these that have discovered that it's time to be implementing these types of practices. I've been at firms where everyone's doing great work. Every employee is engaged in a team effort, serving families, but they don't know where the boundaries are between certain roles and responsibilities. So to have those clarified is absolutely vital. It can really detract from workplace morale if you don't have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Secondly is a clear chain of command. In other words, some type of organizational structure that is well known throughout the organization. So you know as an employee who to go to for certain questions, for certain information, for certain resources. Again, these tools perhaps didn't have a place in your firm years ago when you were doing 200 or 300 calls or less, but as you grow, these are the types of things that can really implement the infrastructure that is needed to have a positive workplace culture and a positive morale. I don't believe I've ever had employee feedback, whether it was in an employee engagement survey or employee interviews, where we have heard that communication was as good as it possibly could be. It's one of those areas that there's always room for improvement. The good news is that there are some tools that we have, and I can share with you, that can help improve communication. Just because you have a lot of communication doesn't mean that it's effective. In this day and age, we have a lot of different channels of communication, from email to text messages to phone conversations and recurring meetings. It's really about setting up what we like to call structured communication and allow a forum for addressing certain key agenda items. Structured communication is a term we use to talk about meetings that are recurring in nature. The agenda is known in advance, and the participants of these meetings come to the table. They know what's going to be discussed. They come looking for the information that typically comes out of these meetings. The most well-known form of structured communication is a daily operational huddle. This is your stand-up meeting in the morning, oftentimes led by the person who was on call, maybe the manager or the leader of the firm. But I can't tell you how many clients we've worked with that have seen such great success in a simple act of implementing this daily huddle. What calls did we take overnight? How has the daily schedule changed? Who needs to adjust their schedule? What are the things that need to be done that we need to shift or adapt? This is one of the most effective forms of communication at the funeral home workplace. But there are others when it comes to structured communication. The other two I have listed here are all staff meetings. Again, staff meeting is a great opportunity to recognize employees, to inform and even offer some skill building and training exercises as they relate to your service standards, your standard operating procedures, any new policies or protocol that you're going to be implementing. I have firms that they have a great employee handbook, but it's been in the desk drawer for years, and there's great material in there. That's a guide to success for so many employees, and there's an opportunity to take bite-sized pieces of that handbook and talk about them in your ongoing staff meetings. And then importantly, the individual one-on-one. I'm going to share with you in a moment here a model for individual one-on-one meetings. This is really important for continuing to develop your relationships with your employees and really address any challenges or issues that they're having on an individual basis. Key for workplace morale and employee development. Anytime you're communicating, though, I challenge you all on the call to be thinking about starting with the why and how you communicate the why of any change, any initiative, any direction your firm is going. This is absolutely essential for employee buy-in. We know this. I'm sure many of you experience this day in and day out. The good news is that most of us in funeral service can get on board with what's best for the family. And typically, the why relates in some way, shape, or form to what's best for the family. There's usually a connection there. It's really at the heart of what we do in funeral service. Next on the list, again, we're talking about the ingredients of an optimum workplace environment. We've talked about setting clear expectations. We talked about communication, and third of the three ingredients I'm going to share with you today is accountability. Accountability is absolutely essential when you think about good morale. There's really no quicker way of killing morale than a lack of accountability throughout an organization. What are some ways in which you can practice accountability management in the workplace? That one-on-one meeting with your employees is going to be vital. The model that we suggest and recommend is this RPI model, stands for results, progress, and issues. This is a time to meet with employees, whether you're doing it quarterly, monthly, or more or less frequently, focusing employees on the results, progress, and issues aligned with the goals of the company. So some people ask, well, what are the goals of my employees? I answer that question typically with, what's the strategic plan of your organization? What are the key company initiatives that you have for your organization for this coming year? Typically, there is a way that every employee is going to be supporting those initiatives, and that's where the results, progress, and issues come in. The other fact of the matter is these individual consultations, these individual meetings allow for a forum for you to be addressing other issues that come up. It just is a way of building a relationship that really is career long and allowing you to support, coach, upskill your team in the areas that are needed. If you're doing one-on-ones regularly, whether it's quarterly or monthly, then come time for employee performance reviews, there's not going to be a lot of surprises. This is probably the hallmark of employee accountability, is the annual, or maybe it's a twice annual employee review. Again, if you're in good regular communication, there shouldn't be too much in the way of a surprise during or after an employee review. Best case scenario is the employee and the management are leaving that review and both parties are feeling pretty good about what just happened. We've identified where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going as a partnership here between the funeral home and the employee. Finally, incentive compensation plans are a great tool for workplace accountability. When we develop and facilitate an incentive compensation plan for clients, we are facilitating this quarterly. So it's very different than an annual profit sharing, where it's really not on someone's mind except for the end of the year. This is a quarterly plan where we're consistently engaged in the results and the progress towards the goals that we have. There's always a company qualifier that's put in place for incentive plans that we facilitate so that companies are not paying out incentive bonuses that are falling in a quarter where the company is not financially healthy. That's a really a hallmark of the program, is that the company needs to be in a good position. The company needs to be achieving the goals at the highest level, and then we're going to be rewarding the performers who are contributing to that success. Typically, when we look at a funeral director and an arranger, some of the areas that we really want to focus in on in terms of measurable metrics, first and foremost, customer experience. You know, we talked about the importance of having a survey program and having them quantifiable. Well, we like to use that overall performance score, that aggregate score of the customer experience for each individual funeral director and arranger. Secondly, we know that arrangers have an impact on revenue generation. We want to be encouraging the discussion of the value of ceremony. We want to be encouraging offering every option for every family. And so average sale targets that are aligned, again, with the company's budget. These are not numbers that are picked out of thin air. These are all aligned with what is expected and needed for funeral home financial performance and funeral home financial sustainability. The last metric there that you can see says days sales outstanding. This is a metric of accounts receivable. So again, we're focusing our funeral directors and arrangers on some of the key areas that they're contributing to, not only some of these legs of the stool we're talking about, customer satisfaction and financial performance, but really rewarding the highest levels of performance. And so these tools can be used in conjunction with that RPI, that quarterly review. Work with clients that do a great job of meeting quarterly with every employee. They're able to talk about the individual employee metrics that are part of the incentive plan, and they're also addressing results, progress, and issues along the way. So these are some great practices when it comes to practicing accountability management with your teams and your employees. So the workplace culture at a funeral home, just like any organization, it's very similar to a living organism. There are things that it needs to grow and thrive. And these listed here are just some additional, what I like to call culture cultivators that you can jot down or use at your funeral home businesses. The first is the question, who is your customer? In some of our customer experience workshops, our working definition of a customer is anyone who depends on the work you do, meaning clearly your client families depend on the work you do. But if you think a little harder about it, your coworkers, your employees, your teammates, they all rely on the work you do also. So when you start to think about your customer as being your colleague, coworker, or teammate, in addition to your client family, and you start asking yourself, how is my customer service? That can really transform the workplace environment. And once we start taking some of those practices that we display daily to our client families and applying that inwardly to our employees and staff, can really cultivate a positive workplace culture. Genuine employee recognition is another one. Harvard Business Review did a study years ago about the ratio of positive to negative feedback that is seen at the highest performing teams. So of the teams that are achieving the highest levels of performance, what kind of ratio of feedback are they seeing? Well, perhaps call it the age of the millennial, but it's 5 to 1, 5 positive to 1 negative. Now, the key here is that it needs to be genuine. We need to be actually providing feedback based on the behavior that we continually want to see and develop. But look for opportunities there. For so many of us, this doesn't come naturally. This is something that we have to practice. And it does have a positive effect on the culture. Team building is another one. Whether it's cross-training, you do some cross-training among locations, cross-training among job descriptions and roles and responsibilities. A great way to put yourself in other people's shoes at the organization and really gain some appreciation, not to mention upskill your employees in other areas. I mentioned mentor programs earlier in the webinar. For those of you who have staff that is exceptionally experienced, maybe you have a disproportionate amount of veteran funeral directors on your team compared to younger funeral directors. This is really a vital practice because you think about the experience, the skill set, just those things that are developed by time in the profession. Those cannot be shared overnight. Those cannot be put in a book. Those cannot be transferred immediately to your staff. So consider implementing some form of a mentor program. We have some models for this. Feel free to reach out. But this is a real positive way of leveraging the resources that you have within the walls of your funeral home. After hours, volunteer, charity events, also great ways of cultivating culture. And those areas actually have a twofold effect of really growing your relationships in the community as well. So that's exceptionally positive, growing market share through community leadership as well. If anything is going to give you the biggest bang for your investment, investment in leadership development. Like it or not, the workplace culture that you have, if you're a owner, operator, or manager of a funeral home, is in a lot of ways a reflection of the leadership that you have displayed. It's hard, and the skill set is one that is in constant need of refinement and nurturing. So if you haven't gone to a leadership seminar, done leadership training, look for opportunities to do so. It will have a positive and material effect on your workplace culture. All right, so we've covered 2 legs of the 4-legged stool. Perhaps you're looking at the clock and saying, Vince, you've spent so much time on customer experience in the workplace. What about the true measures of business performance? Well, again, we really at Johnson Consulting Group view the customer experience and the workplace as being foundational to high financial performance or exceptional financial performance. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the marketplace here before moving into assessing financial performance at the firm. When it comes to measuring marketplace performance, market share is the tool. Some of you may have the opportunity to have data of death certificates by establishment that are filed in your area. If you don't, or you're not using that, I'd recommend looking at your state EDRS or electronic death certificate filing system and seeing if that's available, or if there's an organization. There are some companies out there that do sell that type of data. And if you can get it, it becomes an exceptional tool and a very accurate one for measuring market share performance and your growth or lack of growth in terms of market share. Many funeral homes use obituary notices, whether it's website, paper, or other. That's going to be your second best alternative for measuring market share. If you're not measuring market share, I'd highly recommend beginning. We have to be able to understand what the trends are, what new impacts of competition we're experiencing. But what are the drivers of market share growth? At Johnson Consulting, we really view these 4 areas as being key in driving future market share growth. I've talked extensively about world-class customer experience. We all know the reasons there. It really is a window into the future based on our knowledge of why families choose a funeral home. An active and well-run pre-need program, certainly going to have a profound effect on future market share growth. Community involvement and community leadership. As much as digital and other forms of advertising have grown in the funeral space, there still is a need for nurturing the relationships of centers of influence in our communities, hospice, church, leaders, and other groups in our communities. So these are really the 4 key areas. I want to talk a little bit about pre-need performance before moving on to our financial performance indicators. Assess your total pre-need book of business. Generally, when we're marketing a business for sale, we like to see a pre-need book of business somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 times annual revenue. If your book of business is significantly less than that, then it might be time to take a look in the mirror and really come up with a little bit different plan of action for your pre-need program. I know a lot of firms that through a tight labor market of the past few years have perhaps focused a little less on pre-need and had to focus just on the immediate demands of the business. Now's the time to recalibrate and focus on really driving the value of pre-need both to our families in the community, but also to our employees, that everyone understands that this is an important part of the future health of our business. As important as the actual book of business and the total that exists is the contract quality. What are those average contract values by case type? What is the mix of our pre-need book of business? And this is arguably, in some cases, up to 20 or 30% of our future at-need annual call volume when you think about pre-need fulfillments. And so to have a handle on what that book of business looks like is instrumental. It's very, very important when you begin to think about budgeting for the future and the future top-line revenue for your firm and how that's going to materialize to enterprise value and profitability. So I mentioned pre-need fulfillments. If you're serving 20 to 30% of your at-need volume, it was pre-funded. That's a pretty good metric, pretty good health indicator that you've had an active pre-need program in the past. But this is an ongoing measurement and something that deserves continued attention, at least on a quarterly basis for the firms that we work with. And finally, in the area of marketplace, community leadership, advertising, promotion, this typically is making up about 3 to 4% of your total revenue. I'm going to talk about benchmarks for expense categories here momentarily, but your advertising and promotional plan is about 3 to 4% of your total revenue. That's a sizable chunk of your total revenue annually. Are you tracking the return on that investment? There are effective ways of doing so in using a well-run survey program that is actually asking your client families about how they heard about the funeral home and why they chose the funeral home. Is it because they previously attended a service? Did they get a referral from an organization? Are you continuing to nurture those relationships. If you're seeing a fair amount of referrals from certain organizations in your community, what is your plan for continued community engagement with those groups? So the bottom line here is that we need to be able to measure return on our investment when it comes to advertising and promotion. The best way to do that is through understanding how and why our families have come to us. All right, so for those of you who tuned into the webinar thinking that we were going to talk financial performance, well, here's the section on financials. This is the fourth leg of our four-legged stool, the fourth lens through which we look to assess business performance. And when we think about assessing financial performance of a funeral home enterprise, one of the gold standards is EBITDA, and that stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The reason we use EBITDA is it provides a very good estimate of the free cash flow of a business prior to any debt servicing. It is also one of the key components of calculating enterprise value. So a very direct relationship to EBITDA or improved EBITDA will improve enterprise value. Typically, what we see in the industry currently is EBITDA or cash flow before debt servicing of about 26 to 31%. So if you take your net income and you add back the interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and arguably what we're working with here is actually an adjusted EBITDA. Oftentimes we think about how a business would operate with a certain set of criteria. Perhaps if we were to sell our funeral home business, were there or are there expenses that would no longer be needed? So in many ways, this is an adjusted EBITDA that we're working with. But if your adjusted EBITDA is below 26%, then perhaps it's time to look a little closer and understand why that is, and more importantly, what can be done. Because again, this is a direct relationship between EBITDA and enterprise value. If I were to look at a firm and see EBITDA below benchmark, the next place I would go is to the recast profit and loss statement and understand how the expenses by category stack up or compare to what we see across the industry. So this column that's labeled industry standards, this comes from the tremendous amount of data we have through the M&A deals that we've closed, through the accounting clients that we continue to service and have serviced in the past, and our business consulting clients that we service as well. And so this represents benchmarks for spend by category, as I like to put it. So I'll walk you through these categories and give you a little insight into what we typically include in these categories, so that you, if you choose, can go back to your profit and loss statement and do a little back of the napkin calculation to really see how you're performing financially. And then I'll share with you just some of the ways in which you can improve these things. Cost of goods sold, typically these are caskets, vaults, urns, markers, any merchandise that you're selling to your client families. We also include rebates there from any suppliers, 13 to 18% of revenue, as you can see. Personnel expense, clearly the largest expense category, is not just salaries and wages, but also your payroll taxes, contract labor, even training expense we put there as well, all benefits, 30 to 35% of total revenue. Facilities, you can see, is 8 to 12, pretty self-explanatory here. We would include property taxes, utilities. We don't include rent in that 8 to 12%. Typically what we see is rent being in the range of 7 to 12 for a triple net lease. So you can do the math there and add that if needed. But facilities expense, it might vary. You have some high property tax areas across the country. Maybe you have a large facility in need of a lot of maintenance and repairs. That'll of course increase your facility expense as well. Automotive is pretty self-explanatory, 3% of revenue there. That's auto insurance, fuel, maintenance, any leases. Advertising and promotion, I mentioned that one. Sometimes 3 to 4%, but I have 3% here. That's donations, digital media, print media. Your whole advertising and promotional plan is that category. Other funeral expense. So the way we think about other funeral expenses, the expenses associated with running a funeral home business. So it's different from the other operating expenses because those are typically the general and administrative expenses. Whereas other funeral are things like our prep room supplies, laundry, and cleaning. The other G&A would be bank charges, licenses, permits, legal fees, those types of things. So what I like to do is recast my clients' financial statements into these categories and really stack them up and compare. And you can very quickly see where we may be out of line in terms of comparison to industry benchmarks. Now, I like to use these standards or these benchmarks as guideposts. They are not necessarily hard and fast rules, but they are a really good guidepost on the road to profitability. So if we're not as profitable as we want to be or we could be, then we need to look carefully at these different expense categories and understand where we're perhaps a little out of line and what controls we can exercise to bring those expenses back into line. Now, in many cases, the issue is a top line revenue one. And that's what I want to talk about next is if your revenue is not where it needs to be, perhaps you're operating under capacity, then all of these expense categories are going to be out of line. They're going to be high because the revenue's not there. The denominator's not big enough. So let's talk a little bit about sales performance analysis and measuring sales performance. This is, without a doubt, one of my favorite reports that comes out of Performance Tracker when it comes to assessing sales performance. I really love this report. It can be pulled in a variety of ways. I've pulled it in a pretty high-level version for our purposes today, but we could drill down and really break those different case types apart and see our cremation case mix, namely traditional cremation versus direct cremation, et cetera. But for today's purposes, what I want to show you is how we can use a revenue budget and then practice performance management month to month, quarter to quarter. So in this example, you see the budget column, which is the third column from the left. And this is created in conjunction with our operating budget at the end of every year. And we put this into Performance Tracker, and then all of our sales data flows into Performance Tracker. And then month to month, quarter to quarter, we're analyzing where we are to our expectation after each month, after each quarter. And we can see very quickly, very efficiently, where we're falling short. Is it a call volume issue? Is it a case mix challenge? Is it average sale for a particular case type? I find that there is a lot of data out there these days. We are in many ways blessed with a tremendous amount of data in our profession. But data is only as good as how it can be used to improve. And this data in this format is such that we can quickly and efficiently understand where the shortfall is and what we can do about it. And I'm going to demonstrate that here next. So in this case, we have some underperformance due to lack of call volume. You can see that many clients across the country this year are seeing downturns in call volume. This ranges from sometimes between 10 and 15% year over year. In this case, we're also seeing a slightly unfavorable case mix and some average sale challenges, particularly in our at-need case types. So when we know this, then we can drill down to a little bit deeper level. And what I like to do is take a look at our arranger performance. Now, in this case, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but this is a great report, again, coming out of Performance Tracker to assess performance or differences in performance and making an apples to apples comparison. So we're looking at all traditional true at-need cases at this firm. This is a high volume firm. You can see many of these arrangers have done well over a few dozen arrangements at year's end. But you can also see that there's a striking difference between Tom's average sale for traditional burial and Kevin's average sale. That's well over $2,000 in difference. Over the course of 43 contracts, this adds up to over $86,000 in foregone revenue which materializes to well over $160,000 in enterprise value. So we would want to catch something like this much earlier than at the end of the year. We want to be able to see this month to month, quarter to quarter, so that we can drill down another layer and understand, is this have to do with casket presentation? Does it have to do with something as simple as leaving a service charge off contract when it should be put on? With the right tools, you can quickly and efficiently assess the business performance, but also understand where the action step is. What do we need to do as owners, operators, or managers in the funeral home to correct any underperformance in the financial area? One of the other reports that I typically use with the clients that I work with is some form of contract analysis report. This type of report can be pulled at the company level, by the location level, or even at the arranger level. In this case, I'm just looking at the company level, but one of the things that I like to look at, and what many of you are familiar with, are the type of earn sales frequency that you might see in some of your cremation cases. So there are usually some simple practices that some of your team are doing that materialize to improved performance. In this case, we see sales frequency of earns at 63% for our direct cremation cases. You can see the average sale for those earn sales is just under $200. I've had situations where we look at this by employee, and we notice some significant differences. And it's not always about pointing the finger or cracking the whip. It's about really understanding what's going on there. What's happening in the arrangement room? Are we sitting in on one another's arrangements? Are we understanding the language that we use? Do we have effective product knowledge training that's happening regularly enough? Are we sharing our skills with one another? All of these things can be used and leveraged to benefit not only the client families that we're serving, but the financial health of the business as well. In this case, if the sales frequency just moves a little in the positive direction, just from 63% up to 76%, that materializes to just about $12,000 in additional revenue. So you can start to see that some of these marginal improvements, some of these detailed analyses that can have some management decisions on the tail end can have some positive effects in improving financial performance. I want to finish the conversation on financial performance with this final topic, the topic of accounts receivable. This study by Harvard Business Review I found to be very striking, and there's so many great funeral homes out there that they're just full of good-hearted people that are extending some credit to families in times of need, and they're paying the price for it. They're bearing the burden or the cost. And I just challenge you all to think about this. If you have some challenges with your accounts receivable, if you're carrying balances above 60, 90, or 120 days, the opportunity cost of that is really tremendous. And I challenge you to implement a payment policy if you don't have one. Make sure it's documented, but not just implement it, but practice it. Follow the payment plan. There are no businesses out there these days that are providing you 30 days to pay. If you go and want to buy something outside of getting financing from a bank or financial institution, they just don't exist. So use a payment policy. It's for the advantage of not only your client families, the employees who are doing the arrangements, but also your firm as well. The metric we use typically to normalize the revenue or differences in revenue among locations is days sales outstanding. This is a way of simply comparing apples to apples, because we're actually looking at the accounts receivable in the format of what's the average daily revenue. This is a metric we use for incentive plans. So you can have some great sales performance, but it doesn't mean much if you have an accounts receivable problem. So take a close look at that. That can be oftentimes the lowest hanging fruit if you're in a cash flow pinch or have some cash flow challenges recently. So there you have it. We've talked about the four legs of the stool, how to assess business performance in these four areas. customer service, the workplace, the marketplace, and financial. I hope that this has been a valuable hour for all of you. I know we're tight on time. I'm willing to stay as long as needed here to answer a few questions. But Stan, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you everyone once again for your time and attention for this webinar.
All right, thank you very much, Vince. I do have a few questions here. This goes back to EBITDA. I hope I'm saying it right, is the EBITDA cash flow ratio the same for a cemetery?
It is. It's typically what we're seeing is maybe marginally lower, but still in that 25 to 30% range. And if you're not there, if it's a standalone cemetery, it's a little bit different oftentimes. But I'd be happy to talk to anyone on an individual basis about cash flow challenges, improving EBITDA at your cemetery or combo if it's a combo. But the short answer is yes. We're typically seeing comparable margins when we compare EBITDA to revenue.
This goes back to early in the webinar to why people use a funeral director. And although it didn't have a lot of numbers, what's your best advice for the initial contact if someone just reaches out for a funeral director for the first time to make sure they get that business?
This is in many ways underutilized and undertrained area of customer experience. We typically see some of the lowest scores in customer feedback from the initial call, which means that if you're not training your team, your employees, if you're not role playing or doing some form of skill building exercises, you have a big area of opportunity. My recommendation to the clients that I work with are meet people where they're at, display value, share value with a family. Oftentimes you have families calling, they're not entirely sure what to ask. Everyone knows that there's always a price associated with services, so sometimes that's the only thing that they do ask. But take the time to walk a family through the process, be able to quickly and clearly communicate the reasons why your funeral home is so great. Don't be afraid to stand up proud for the value of funeral ceremony and service and what you do at your firms every day. I think that if you can do that on a first call, on an initial call, and really put a family at ease, those things are going to be remembered, and that can really differentiate you from some of the other funeral providers in your area.
All righty. This one just came in. Can I schedule a one-on-one phone consultation with you? I average 60 to 75 calls a year. I'm competing with 2 other funeral homes, and we all, I believe, and all 3 of us have a combination of 200 calls.
Yeah, the answer to that, Stan, is absolutely. My contact information's on the screen. If you send me an email, I'll send you a link, a scheduling link, so that you can pick a time that's convenient for you. I'm always happy to hop on a call to talk through individual challenges and how Johnson Consulting could support you in your funeral home business. As I mentioned, I'm a funeral director. I'm proud to be, and it's a real privilege to serve this profession and the clients that we do. So feel free to use that contact information that's on the screen.
Excellent. Okay, 2 more here. You talked about having daily staff meetings. Is there a limit to how long they should be so they don't go on and on and on, and then all of a sudden someone looks and goes, whoa, it's 11 a.m. already, wow.
Yeah, the daily huddle, as we describe it, is very different than a staff meeting. The big difference is the time. Staff meeting might be an hour in length. A daily huddle is just that. It's a quick meeting to call the play for the day. You perhaps have a daily schedule. You have an idea, maybe a digital whiteboard of what's going on this week. But it's a time to really stand together, understand what happened in the last 12 or 16 hours and how that affects the schedule for the day. I would recommend that a daily huddle really should be no longer than 15 minutes if possible. During busy periods, you might have a need to have an afternoon huddle. Maybe you took a few calls in the morning. Everyone was on funerals or arrangements in the morning. Maybe after lunch, it's just time to huddle up and talk about the play for the afternoon. But this is oftentimes what we see is that once the rhythm is introduced, you have staff that really looks for this. They need it. They look for it because it's about setting clear expectations, about effective communication, about who's doing what on the team. And the true hallmark of a successful huddle, as we've described it, is if the meeting can happen effectively without the ownership, management, or manager. If the team ends up owning that meeting, then you know you've created something that's valuable and that's going to last because the team is running it on their own.
All righty, and a final question. This goes back to an employee handbook. How often should a firm freshen up its employee handbook?
I would recommend doing that at least every couple of years, if not every year. If you work with an HR attorney, it's always good to touch base and ensure that you're covering all the legal aspects of what needs to be in an employee handbook. But also just from an operational standpoint, think about how services have changed over the last 10 years. Think about how your staff makeup has changed. There are likely some new policies. Maybe it relates to your vacation or personal time off policy. Is it time to brush that up? Is it working well? All those things really need to be revisited on occasionally, just to make sure that you're providing really a roadmap for success for your team, because that's what we view an employee handbook as. This is your roadmap for success at our organization. And I think it demonstrates a lot of respect to your employees to continually revise and train on that and make sure that you're clearly communicating those expectations. So I guess the short answer is every year would be a best practice.
Very good. Thank you, Vince. And just had a question come in that I can answer. Can we access a recording of this webinar? Yes, you will get an email, I believe tomorrow, with a copy of the webinar. If not, this is Stan. Just send me an email and I'll make sure I get you a link to the copy of the webinar. So Vince, thank you very much. And just want to say you can visit www.americanfuneraldirector.com and click on the webinar tab to sign up for our future webinars and watch our library of past on-demand webinars. And thank you to Vince Roberge and Johnson Consulting. And thank you all to joining today's webinar. As I just said, be sure to keep an eye out for a follow-up email, which will include today's webinar recording. Any final words from you, Vince?
Only thank you very much for all your attendance today, to all the participants, and thank you, Stan. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to speaking with some of you on a follow-up basis, and keep up the good work.
All right, Vince, thank you so much, and everyone have a great day. So long.